Introducing you to people across North Carolina and around the world who put their Catholic faith into action. This is FaithWorks on Catholic 540 AM Divine Mercy Radio. Now, here's your host for FaithWorks, Ellen White.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. Our show highlights individuals through God's grace who put their faith into action daily. Amazing people who have an interesting, sometimes overlooked impact on our Catholic faith. On FaithWorks, we share their stories. I'm your host, Ellen White. What if you could step out of your daily routine and walk the quiet paths of Assisi? Stand in the very places where one of the most beloved saints in history encountered Christ, or experience the beauty of Italy's sacred spaces without ever leaving home. Today, we're inviting you on that journey. Joining me is Teresa Tomeo, Catholic author, speaker, and longtime radio host, whose passion for pilgrimage and storytelling has inspired countless people to encounter their faith in a deeper way. Her latest book, I'm so excited, Italy's Shrines and Wonders, Volume 2, Discovering Sacred Spaces and Fascinating Places in the Life of St. Francis of Assisi, brings readers into the heart of St. Francis's world, tracing his path from conversion to radical faith, all through the sacred places where it truly happened. Living just minutes from Assisi, Teresa offers a perspective that is both deeply personal and spiritually rich, helping us see St. Francis not as a distant figure in history, but as a living witness whose message still speaks to us today. So whether you've made a pilgrimage to Italy or only dreamed of it, stay with us because this conversation might just change the way you see faith, simplicity, and what it means to follow Christ. Teresa, welcome to FaithWorks.
It's great to talk to you again. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my gosh.
Son Francesco.
Francesco, yes. And I think I'd said before the interview that we spoke last March with the first book of Italy's Shrines and Wonders. And the setup of the book is so incredibly beautiful. The photographs that you have in there are amazing. But this book, I mean, it really completes that. It adds to it so beautifully. And the focus on St. Francis is just amazing. So what do you hope people experience on that journey as they dive into this book?
Well, I hope it's similar to the first Italy Shrines and Wonders. Our plan is, God willing, to do a number of these different books. And we decided to do St. Francis because of the year of St. Francis, which started at the end of course, 2025 and run through January 10th of 2027. So it's another holy year, a jubilee year, similar to being able to get indulgences, and there's special prayers if you visit a Franciscan-related church. And I've been really moved by living in Umbria. I live about 35 minutes away from Assisi, as you mentioned, just minutes away, and learning so much more about him. I really kind of put him on the shelf, and I just thought, with the year of St. Francis and the fact that he covered so much ground in Italy, even though this was the 13th century, if people knew him the way he really was in terms of what he did, where he went, these literally off the beaten path places, and what he accomplished in such a short life, I think it would really give people a different perspective, but also, I hope, encourage them to come to these areas that a lot of people just don't visit. They think of St. Francis, and of course they're going to Assisi, which is off the charts gorgeous. I love Assisi. But if anybody in Assisi will tell you, go further, expand, go beyond Assisi, because there's so much more to learn. And that area of Italy, Umbria, where we live, is known as the Cotta Verde, or the Green Heart. And we were just there for the St. Francis relics that were on display for veneration for a month. And I kept saying to my husband, Deacon Dom, it's so green. Everything was so green. I mean, really, it would give Ireland a run for its money, I think. So, it really is just an opportunity to explore different areas of Italy, but always tying in that Catholic perspective. And what a better way than St. Francis of Assisi, one of our greatest saints.
The Green Heart in Umbria. That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. It paints such a beautiful picture. And you said you have a section, and you just mentioned this a few minutes ago, on if you knew Francis. What do most people misunderstand about him, Teresa, do you think?
I think the biggest thing is as I said, we keep him on a shelf and we put him in a box. And I talk about this in the introduction. And yes, he was a lover of animals, a lover of the environment. He was so much more than that. Francis, and I found this out when I was doing this research, wrote more about the Eucharist than anything else.
Ah.
And he did. And he actually did rebuild the church physically as well as spiritually when he heard Christ talking to him on the famous and beautiful San Damiano cross, which is now hanging in the St. George Chapel of St. Clare's Basilica in Assisi. And Jesus said to him, rebuild my church. Mm-hmm. Most people assume that he just meant, and at first Francis did too, that Jesus was talking about the spiritual nature of the church. Well, he was, but he was also talking about the physical nature, because many churches back then, because there was so much upheaval and so many wars back and forth and infighting in Italy between all these small towns, especially Assisi and Perugia, that these churches were crumbling. And as a matter of fact, San Damiano, where the cross was the convent and church where the cross originally was hanging, that's where he heard Christ speak to him. Mm-hmm. That was in ruin. That was the first church that he physically rebuilt. He also physically rebuilt the Portiuncula, which is now below Assisi in Santa Maria dell'Angeli, and also another church in Rivatorto, which is another really cool place we can talk about. So I think the biggest misunderstanding is, A, people just kind of have him in a box as some sort of environmentalist hippie that loved God. And they also limit him to thinking, well, he was a spiritual leader, but they didn't realize how much physically he knew the church was important. He did the vestments, the vessels that are used at Mass, the altar, that the church was fit for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So we need to understand that. And he also traveled all over the place, all over Italy, to the Holy Land, which is why all the different churches are under the direction of the Franciscans. They're the custodians of the Holy Land churches. And he made it as far as Egypt to meet with the Sultan. So he's got such a diverse background and did so many things, and I think we don't know enough about that.
Yeah, I like that you said environmentalist hippie, for sure. That's how I view it, or, with the animals, but on the depth of it. Right. And it wasn't really until I encountered a book that I'd mentioned before about his life that really opened my eyes to what he'd done. And now this is just incredible. And I'm curious, Teresa, too, with you living in such close proximity to Assisi, or just minutes away, I guess, from him and where he was. And I know that clearly shaped Italy's Shrines and Wonders, Volume 2. How has that proximity changed the way you tell his story?
Well, I try to walk people through the different towns, and when I say that, walk a mile in his shoes or his sandals, and to get appreciate what it must have been like and understand what the world was like at that point. And even in the midst of the 12th to the 13th century, and you think, well, didn't have TV, didn't have radio, didn't have, planes, trains, and automobiles, but they did still have a lot of issues facing them in the day. And Francis sought out silence so often, and that's a big part of the book as well, looking at these different hermitages all over Italy that he built and had the brothers build with him, the Franciscan friars. So I wanted to embrace what I was feeling, because he's just everywhere in Italy, but especially in central Italy. You can't go a mile without seeing something dedicated to St. Francis or something Franciscan. And I think that says a lot about it. So I just feel a lot closer to him. And it's very special for me as a deacon's wife, because the other thing a lot of people don't know is that Francis never became a priest. He was a deacon. And people don't know that, or they forget that, and that means a lot to us. His reverence for the priesthood, his reverence for the hands, of course, that would consecrate, the bread and wine to become the body and blood. So there's all these different things that we don't know, but being there, you learn this. And I try to take people there in my own personal experience of living there. And, we can go to lunch in Assisi, which is crazy. We did that last year. We had to go get some rosaries for someone, I forget, maybe for some of the young people at our Catholic school, where Dom serves as a deacon in Catholic parish, and we were sitting there having a pizza, and I said, do you realize we're eating lunch in Assisi? It's like it doesn't, it's like, okay, wait a minute, how did this happen? But yeah, just trying to take people there and kind of get the feel of what it must have been like for him, because Assisi itself is very medieval still. They've maintained that beauty. The cobblestone streets, the buildings are well maintained. The basilicas are off the charts. So it's just trying to give people a feel for that.
And personally, Teresa, I've got to ask you this, because you said that when you were there, you try to embrace everything that you encountered that had to do with St. Francis and I guess his walk. And then you talked about silence. What does that look like? Paint that picture for our listeners when you're just embracing that moment of silence and, walking in St. Francis's shoes.
Well, for me, someone who talks for a living, as you do, being silent is not the easiest thing for us to accomplish. So that's number one. And we made a big decision. We decided not to buy a television. we can get the internet. We have great internet, so obviously I can see breaking news and I can follow what's going on in the world. But I'm a news junkie as a former news person, as you know, so I didn't want to get into the habit oftentimes when I'm back, in the States, because I need to know what's going on. And sometimes I will watch 2, 3, 4 hours, of all these different news programs or listen to what's going on. And I find myself, like many people do, when you watch too much news, you get very distressed. And we made a commitment when we bought our little place. We were in a very small village of about 200, not even 200 people, and it's a castle. It's all connected, and you have to walk through archways to get in. The apartments are separate, but they're all connected in the sense of being on the same street, and it's one building in the middle. You can imagine this castle. And we didn't want to lose that piece because we have a balcony on the back of our place that looks out over a valley. And it's just, we were thinking about that movie, How Green Is My Valley, or that book, How Green Is My Valley, when we were just there, to see the relics, because it's just rolling hills. And so that piece is something I seek when I come back here to the United States. We live in Metro Detroit, which is a lovely area, southeastern Michigan, but it's a huge area with a population of between 4 and 6 million people if you look at all the counties. And it's busy, and it's noisy. And so for me, having that silence, and I get up in the morning, go for a walk, and you were walking past a vineyard on one side and a winery on the other side, an olive grove on the other side, and seeing the rolling hills, it looks like a painting, it really does. And so that's what St. Francis saw, because it hasn't changed that much. Obviously, we have all the modern conveniences, but the villages are still intact, many of them. Umbria is very proud of its heritage. And it's just peace. It's pace. I don't know how to describe it, except that the only noise I hear, as I say in the book, are the birds, the church bells, because we have a little church in our village, and then also a cute little golden retriever 2 doors down, Savannah, who's always barking to say hi to everybody. But, you come back here to my hometown of Metro Detroit, and there's, it's a very, very busy area, and it's really kind of hard for me to get settled. So, I wanted to be like St. Francis and just have that quiet and search for it and have your happy place. You can just go and be alone with God.
And you can't really hear him unless you're quiet. So that's
exactly.
a very important message. Exactly. And I remember you mentioning last year that you chose not to buy a television. So obviously it's done wonders for you. All right. Well, let's do a deep dive into St. Francis for those that are tuning in that might not really be familiar with who he really was. Take us back to the beginning. Who was St. Francis before his conversion? What would you say?
Well, before his conversion, he was born into a very well-to-do family. And his father had a business, and he would travel to France quite a bit. And that's why he was named Francis, because his father really liked France, as a matter of fact. So they would go back and forth. So he was well-traveled even as a youth, but they were very well-to-do. And he was a 13th century party boy. He loved to, wear the nice clothes. He loved to go to all the events and the parties, and he was, very social. And he was also very, very selfish, very self-centered, and thought a lot of himself. And he absolutely despised the lepers. He had a major, conversion on that whole issue as well. But things didn't work out too well for him as he thought they were going to do. God took his life in a whole different direction. And what happened was, I'll summarize it and really want to encourage people to get the book to get more information. But when Assisi and Perugia, who are still competitive in this day and age, it's like Siena and Florence, Assisi, Perugia. That's why when you go to Italy, especially in places like Tuscany and Umbria and northern Lazio, you see all these walled villages, is because they did it for protection, because Italy hasn't been unified for that long. And prior to that, it was a protection mechanism. So they would build them high on the hills and build these, medieval walls around them. Anyway, he decides that he's going to take up, the fight for his hometown of Assisi. And so they go into this war, the Battle of Collestrata. Collestrata is a town very close to Assisi. And they have this very bloody battle. Assisi loses, and so Perugia takes a number of people into custody, including St. Francis of Assisi, and he's in prison for over a year. And he gets very, very sick. And after he gets out of prison, he's at home and recuperating still. But he still doesn't really have that change of heart. He's starting to slowly realize that maybe his life is not meaningful enough. So he's got kind of one foot in the secular world, one foot almost in the Christian world. Then he says, hey, I could still have this, vision of grandeur, become a knight in the papal army. That's it. I'll go fight for the Pope, right? So he suits up, and he's on his way down to Puglia, which is along the Adriatic in southern Italy. And along the way, not too far away, he has to stop because it's too much for him. He gets very, very sick, and he has to stop in a beautiful town called Spoleto. And while he was in Spoleto, he had a vision, and he heard God say, follow the master, not the man. and he felt that God was telling him, you got to follow me, and you have to do what I say. And so he comes back to Assisi, and this is illustrated in the book, and there's images of this as well. My favorite piece of art, despite all the giottos, all the frescoes, all the gorgeous artwork in these basilicas in Assisi, I love the statue by Naborto, who is an artist from nearby Spello, who did this beautiful statue of Francis in full armor, on a horse, also in full armor, and their heads are both down facing the church. And the statue is called The Return of St. Francis. And he has his, knocked off the high horse moment where he realizes that God's in charge and he's not. And that's when he surrenders, and that's when things start to change. So he started out not, sometimes people think saints, they were born a saint. They weren't. Mm-hmm. Most of the saints suffered. They had rough lives. They, lived a lot of. It's important for people to understand that not every saint was just born perfect. Now, nobody's perfect except, of course, our Blessed Mother Jesus. But you know what I'm saying? I think we have this image of they didn't have to struggle at all. And so he has this reversion, this huge, falling in love with God and realizing that God's leading the way. He goes to pray, and he goes into the convent of San Damiano, which sits right outside the Assisi walls today. And that's when the cross, Jesus speaks to him from the cross and says, Francis, rebuild my church because, as you can see, it's in ruins. And so he goes about slowly but surely, one step at a time, trying to figure out what God wants from him. And he started by rebuilding churches physically, and he would go around and beg for money to help rebuild the churches. He would turn around and give it to the priests. He started with 2 or 3 men. They moved down to a place called Rivatorto, which is now a beautiful church that inside this church has 2 huts where they lived. And you talk about sparse, and you talk about living a simple life. Eventually he moves over to where the Porciuncula is now, the St. Mary of the Angels, and gets permission from the Pope to start the Friars Minor, which was the first order. And he takes off from there, and he goes around. I'm really summarizing it, but he's probably the greatest itinerant preacher since our Lord, and, just goes literally all over Italy, north, south, east, and west, goes over, as I mentioned earlier, to the Holy Land. Think about that, in the 13th century. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine traveling to the Holy Land? Mm-hmm. The guides, when you go to Assisi, say it probably was a 2-month to 3-month boat trip both ways. So, but yeah, and then he just continues to spread the faith, and people just love him. St. Clare heard him preach in front of San Rufino, which is a church at the very top of the hill in Assisi, and she decides that she wants to join him. He confers a habit on her down below in St. Mary of the Angels, which is also where he dies as a chapel of the transit. It's a very important chapel in that church. And it's just a fascinating story of this man who just had a radical love for God. He has this amazing, he's just so head over heels in love with Jesus, especially the Eucharist. And the interesting thing, though, is that people see him as someone who, again, like we do most of the saints, didn't have any struggles, everything was wonderful. Well, there was a lot of infighting, and especially toward the end of his life when he went to Laverna, and that's one of the reasons he went to Laverna in Tuscany, because he needed to pray about what was happening. There was a lot of infighting between the friars minors. Some thought the rule was too strict, others thought it was getting too loose. Mm-hmm. And so he goes to Laverna to pray, and he receives the wounds of Christ, the stigmata, and then about a year after that, he passes away. So he died when he was 44 years old, but had such an impact. He loved animals. Of course, the Canticles of the Sun he wrote, which is beautiful, wrote so many prayers and talked about creation. There's even a beautiful path that I discovered. Everybody hears the story about him preaching to the birds, and they kind of think, well, maybe it's just tradition, but it's actually documented in Italy. There's 3 actual spots in Umbria where they know that he walked. As a matter of fact, the secular order of Franciscans is located very close to the shrine that's built in one of the spots where he preached to the birds. So it's just fascinating to be there and to find out all these little things and all these places that he was and what a mark he made. But at the end of the day, he's probably, as I said, to me, when you read his letters, when you read what he spoke of in the Eucharist, the way people were just so enamored with him, his personality, his exuberance, he was so on fire for the Lord. You can just understand why he had such an impact.
You talk about his letters. You have that picture in your book of that actual handwritten letter that he wrote to Brother Leo. That is incredible to look at that. Go ahead.
A lot of people don't even go there. That's the thing that amazes me. I didn't even know it was there. We went to Spoleto because we heard the town was beautiful. This was 5-6 years ago. And we heard it was a great place. It has this amphitheater. It has a lot of archaeology. It has these amazing Roman aqueducts. The church there is beautiful. I didn't even know about the letter. I didn't even know about the St. Francis connection there. And I'm a Catholic talk show host. Of course, I knew of St. Francis, but a lot of people don't go to Spoleto, which is another gorgeous town, which is south of Assisi, not that far. But yeah, it's amazing. That letter is just phenomenal. It's his writing. It's the writing of a saint. Yeah.
And you mentioned a statue, and I thought for sure you were going to say the one of him cleaning the wounds of the leper. That's an incredible statue.
Well, that's in Rivetorto. Yeah, isn't that powerful?
Yes.
So Rivetorto is another place, Ellen, that I didn't go to. My husband and I would drive by every time we went to Assisi or go to the mall. You pass Assisi, and if you want to go a little bit further to Foligno or these other great places, you pass this church that is in the lower part, is in a flat part of the area of right below Assisi, kind of next to St. Mary of the Angels. The town is actually named after that big basilica below. And you see this beautiful stained glass window with an image of St. Francis and Elijah. And I thought, that's Rivetorto. We should go someday. Well, I did include it not only in the book, but I have a new series coming out with the EWTN Learn mission. And that starts right after Easter. And we go to Rivetorto and we take people there. And inside that church are two huts. They're modeled after the ones that Francis slept in. So it's, and then outside is that statue of him cleaning the wounds of the leper. And as I mentioned earlier, he had this experience when he came back to the Lord. He saw them as beautiful people as opposed to, oh my gosh, I can't go near them. They're diseased, they smell, they're horrible, they're repugnant. But he saw them as Christ, and he worked with them for, a long time in that area of Italy.
What a radical transformation in him and his life, and gives us hope, right? All right. So, that moment at San Damiano, Teresa, when Christ tells him to rebuild my church, what does that call mean for us today, would you say?
Well, I think maybe we could take it literally the way he said it, because we still have a lot of places, right, where we see that churches need our help, they need our support, maybe our financial support, maybe we're not tithing enough. And then spiritually, what are we doing? What are we doing not just for our own spiritual walk with the Lord, but if we're not giving back, if we're not doing something in the community at the parish level? I mean, Pope Leo just gave a great audience message, or was it the Angelus? I can't remember, but he talked about the fact that everyone has to be in, I'm paraphrasing, everybody in the pool, nobody gets a break when it comes to evangelization. We're all called to evangelize by virtue of our baptism. So what does that mean for you? What does it look like? It doesn't mean that we go and hit people over the head with the Bible and the catechism. That is not a winning solution. It doesn't work. But it does mean that we have to evangelize, and we all have to figure out what God is calling us to do. It's going to look different for everyone. But I think, again, what are we doing in our parish to build up our parish? And what are we doing in our own efforts to evangelize and meet people where they're at?
What are we doing? All right. If you're just tuning in, this is Ellen White with FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. And today I'm joined by Teresa Tomeo as we explore her book, Italy's Shrines and Wonders, Volume 2, Discovering Sacred Spaces and Fascinating Places in the Life of St. Francis of Assisi. We're talking about the life, conversion, and spiritual legacy of St. Francis and how the places he lived and prayed can still inspire us today. And we are grateful for our show's sponsor, Thales College. Okay, so we were talking about, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, Rivetorto? Rivetorto.
Yeah.
And you described so vividly St. Francis embracing radical poverty. What was he truly seeking, Teresa, do you think?
I think he was seeking to strip himself of his former lifestyle because he was very much into the nice clothes and the appearances. And we know that there's a spot in Assisi, and this is why Carlo Acutis wanted to be buried at St. Mary Major, where St. Carlo Acutis, where his tomb is because that church is built on the spot where St. Francis literally tore off his clothes in the middle of the street and just threw his clothes, renounced his former lifestyle, renounced the wealth of the family, and went off to be, this itinerant preacher and start, 3 orders of the, 3 actually religious orders, and then we have secular orders as well, the Franciscans. But that's what it meant for him. He wanted to be radical. The thing about Francis is you have to be all in, which is a good message for us because we can't really understand our true peace and have his message of peace unless we surrender fully to God. And that's what he did, not just once, but he did it repeatedly. So I think that's what he was looking for. And Rivetorto, if you think about, I'll tell you what, Ellen, there's no way I could, I'm not that Franciscan at this point in my life, even though in my 60s, I have a long way to go. He lived so, you talk about basic. They slept either on a dirt floor or on, a tree limb. I mean, it's just nuts in terms of our modernization. But that's what he wanted. He wanted to be free of everything worldly so he could give himself to Christ. And I mean, that's not saying that God is telling us that we have to do this. We have to feed our children. We have to keep a roof over our head. But I think it is a reminder that there's maybe other things in our life that we're clinging to. What are we clinging to? Whom are we clinging that is holding us back? And for Francis, it was his life of wealth and comfort. That could mean something similar for other people who want to live a more Franciscan lifestyle. But I think for most of us, it's about our ideas, what we want, our goals, the fact that we want to be in control. So I think that's what he was after, to make sure that he constantly allowed God to get through to him, and he wanted to be stripped of anything worldly that would come between him and God.
Yeah, you have to be all in. You can't sit on the fence. And something that just occurred to me, Teresa, when you said our ideas, what we want, and also how we envision God. It's usually way off from how God truly is. So that's been a new reflection for me is, Lord, change my view so that, I'm loving you and I'm trying to embrace you as you really are and not how I've created you to be. So, okay. All right. So the Hermitage at Eremo del Charceri?
Charceri, very good. Look at you. Ooh.
It reveals his deep need for silence and prayer. Why was that essential to his mission?
Well, if you're going to hear God, you can. Mother Teresa talks about this, and even in First Kings, right? How does God come to us? He doesn't come in the storm. He doesn't come in the rain. He doesn't come in the wind. He comes to us in the silence. And Mother Teresa talked about that. St. Mother Teresa talked about that a lot too. And we're not going to hear God if we don't silence ourselves. And Francis knew that. And even at a time, as I mentioned earlier, Ellen, when they didn't have all the noise that we did. And then Dominic and I were talking about this when I was writing the book. He said, yeah, but he had a different kind of noise. There was still the noise of the world. There were demands on him. There was a noise of the infighting. There was still the noise of the problems in Italy because of all the different wars and factions were at each other's throats and families. Similar to what St. Catherine of Siena would go through several hundred years later, where she came in and she was trying to promote peace, and not only in the church but between these different villages and towns and cities. And so there was a lot of noise in their own time, and so he knew that in order to be closer to God, he had to go to a place that was silent but also revealed a lot of nature. So many of these places, such as Greccio or Caccieri up above Assisi, which is the one we're talking about right now, or Laverna, I mean, you talk about being way up. They're up literally in the mountains. I mean, they're spectacularly stunning. But it's not easy to get to, even nowadays, in terms of if you drive a car up to Laverna, you go around and around and around and around. Literally, we were in our car when we went to Laverna a few years ago when I was doing research for the book. We were probably in the car, Ellen, for about 10 minutes before we got to the actual shrine.
Oh, my God.
And Francis walked that from Assisi. Just think about it. It's just crazy. And the same thing with Greccio, which is in northern Lazio, which is where he created the first Christmas crèche, which is a stunning place that people drive by on the freeway on their way back to Rome or on the way up to Florence. They're all like that. They're all in these very, very remote places. And that's just a few of them. I mean, there's other places across Italy, but it would be a 700-page book if I included them all. So I included the ones that were tied with very specific instances in his life. So the main three places that we have are the Assisi Hermitage that you just mentioned, Laverna, which is where he received the stigmata, and then Greccio, where he created the first crèche. Each of those places has a beautiful hermitage where the friars would stay and sleep, and they move around, and they go to another one and have their time for prayer. So that silence was super important for him. And all the saints talk about it. We have to be alone with God. We have to have that quiet if we're going to hear from him.
I have to share my own little miracle St. Francis moment, if you'll let me. I was finishing up that book on his life that was so impactful to me. And I was at the end, and I knew it was coming to a close. And there was a prayer at the end, and I was sitting in church, and it was after Christmas, not even paying attention, after Mass one day during the week. And I just thought, oh, you know what? It'd be so great to go up to the altar rail and just sit and pray this prayer without even thinking about what was in front of me. And I'm starting to pray this prayer. I start crying, and I look up, and there's the crèche right in front of me.
Oh,
it was just a great culmination of that moment. I thought, oh, okay, St. Francis, I hear you. Thank you so much for your witness. This is amazing. So all those
that's
little...
another God incident. Yep.
You got it. You got it. All right. So, and you talked about his love for Christ, especially the Eucharist and the cross. And you mentioned Greccio and Laverna. How do these sacred places help us better understand that love that he had?
Well, I think all the hermitages we just mentioned, Greccio, Laverna. I mean, literally, when he went to Laverna, he was praying on a rock. I mean, so now it's a beautiful shrine. There was a little place where the Franciscans would go, but it was given to him by a family, but it was pretty much, really the bare bones of nature. But I think especially Greccio is super important because he had just come back from the Holy Land, and he was so moved by what he saw there that he wanted to bring Holy Land, that nativity experience, to the people, the poor people in that area of Italy, central Italy, northern Lazio, because he knew they would never, no one, I mean, who went to the Holy Land really in the 13th century? Only the very wealthy or the very adventurous. And Francis at that point was an active in his new order, so he was, very, very poor. And he, as I said earlier, took a ship and sailed over for about 3 months on the water, which probably was not a very, it wasn't like one of our cruise ships today, as we might imagine. But I think for Greccio, it would be important for people to go there because Francis enlisted one of his townspeople in the town of Greccio, and there's actually a plaque in a little town, which is about a mile from the shrine, to get him to get the animals and get the people involved. But he didn't want anything but animals. He didn't want adults in like the baby Jesus there. He just wanted the animals. And then when he preached, because he was a deacon, he read the gospel for the midnight mass, and then he preached. And it was very bare bones. There was a stone there, and there's now a little, and you probably saw the picture in the book, there's an olive wood statue of baby Jesus that was donated by Pope Francis. But when he was talking about the baby Jesus with so much love during the homily, baby Jesus appeared in his arms. So there was a miracle there. And I think the simplicity, he wanted people to understand that Christ came to this earth, even though he was God, with literally nothing, no clothes on his back, as an innocent child and surrounded by animals. And so he really wanted to pare it down for the people to understand the sacrifice that God was making in coming down to earth as a child. And that's what it meant to him. And I think that reminds us when we go to Greccio, because it's a very simple cave, there's a little grotto there, and it's attached to a very humble hermitage, well, like a convent for the friars there so they could pray. And it's way, way up on this mountain, and it's spectacular. How they built these things is beyond me in terms of the structure. But I think for us, when we go to these places, we're reminded of the simplicity of God, of our life, of how God just comes to us in these basic ways, comes as a child, very humbly. And also, I think, emulating Francis in his love of nature because it reflects God. Everything he did because he loved God. And even when he went to preach to the birds, I mean, that's one of my favorite new spots. There's this whole area. There's actually 3 spots dedicated to his preaching to the birds. And in my research, I came across this conference, this press conference that was held. This is in 2020, in the midst of COVID. There was a developer that wanted to put all these different solar panels in the middle of this field. But the people of this area knew that this is where Francis walked and talked and preached to the birds. And the local government, along with the local bishop, one of the bishops in Umbria, said, no, this is sacred, this is holy ground. And so they put together this team of people, and they had a contest, and they went around looking for an artist to build a statue of Francis preaching to the birds. There's also a shrine in a place called Pandacara, which is down the street from this open field. The open field now has this beautiful statue of Francis holding birds. That's also in the book, and it has an outdoor chapel. Then you have the actual shrine that's along the side of the road. Then you have this stone in Bavagna, a little town, another beautiful medieval town not far from Assisi. All within like about a 3-mile radius is this Path of the Birds. And to this day, the Path of the Birds really is in the middle of nowhere. You can see Assisi in the background, but it's literally next to a horse farm and other farmland and nothing else around it. But it's beautiful because they have this outdoor altar with birds carved into the stone, giant statue of St. Francis, a tau cross that's carved into the grass, and then there's pews, cement pews where you can sit and actually pray, or you can even have Mass out there. And then the little stone on which he preached is housed in a little chapel in the Church of St. Francis in nearby Bavagna. So when you go to these places, it shows you what Francis is trying to tell us. Get back to God, look at nature, look at his creativity, but understand that all these things are not beautiful of themselves. Their beauty is all because it glorifies God. So I think that's what we can learn from him, and that's what I take from it. We need the silence. We need to appreciate creation. We need all of this in our relationship with the Lord.
Oh, gosh, that's so incredible. And these pictures are beautiful. And I want that altar in my backyard.
I know, wouldn't that be nice?
I'm looking at it right now. All right. So we've got about a little bit less than 10 minutes left, Teresa. And I want to talk about the relevance of St. Francis today and an invitation that you can give to the audience about and practical wisdom about this book and maybe being a pilgrim. So as we reflect on the Jubilee year of St. Francis, how does his witness of poverty, humility, and rebuilding the church speak to us right now? We kind of touched on that earlier, but what would you say again?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it's the answer is probably complex in the sense that the one thing you were talking about, the God-sidence you had, the big God-sidence I had was when I realized Pope Leo declaring the Jubilee year of St. Francis, and then we have all this going on now with the conflict in Iran and all this unrest, and we start to celebrate this year of St. Francis, and all, heck breaks loose, right, around the world, especially in the Middle East, and I'm thinking, wow, think about the timing of God's timing and how the Holy Spirit spoke to Pope Leo to give him that idea to have this holy year of St. Francis, because in October, we haven't mentioned this yet, but October 3rd will be the 800th anniversary of his death. He died on October 3rd. His feast day is October 4th, but he died on October 3rd. And so it's 800 years. That's why Pope Leo declared this the year of St. Francis. But God's timing and God sending us a message of peace. And then I think about the fact that where's most of the conflict most recently? I mean, of course, we have the horrible war in Ukraine, but most recently, again, it's been heating up in the Middle East. And what did Francis do? He went to the Middle East to meet with the Sultan in the middle of the Crusades. And there's a beautiful line. People, if they want to find out more about St. Francis, there's an old movie with Bradford Dillman praying St. Francis and Dolores Hart playing St. Clare of Assisi. And we see him meeting the Sultan. And he doesn't convert him, but they end up being friends. And he says to Francis, he says, you know what, I don't accept your God at this point, but I accept you as a friend. And Francis says, you know what, that's a start. And to me, that was such a perfect line because, again, as I said earlier, sometimes we think we have to, if we're going to evangelize, that we really have to get people, give them that right answer and give them the formula where they're going to be, accepting Jesus and coming into the Catholic Church. That's not how it works. It starts with a relationship. It starts with a friendship. So I think that's a big lesson. I think seeking silence. And we just had that big case with Meta, right, where they lost, and now they're appealing, of course. But the case out of New Mexico, and we haven't heard the verdict yet in Los Angeles, but this is because too many people, especially young people, are being influenced by the media. Pope Leo has talked about this. Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, John Paul II wrote a whole thing on the media. So I think he's a great reminder for seeking silence. We need silence in our lives. We need to embrace the Eucharist more in our lives and understand what the Eucharist is. It's the source and center of the faith, but why? And again, just to live simply, and doesn't mean that you have to throw away all the modern conveniences. But as I said earlier, to what or to whom are you clinging? Are you too bogged down with worldly stuff, not just physical stuff, but what about emotional stuff? What about your ideas and your plans that I have to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, because that was me. I had all these goals, and I made them all, I hit them all, but then I found out, oh, wait a minute, I have all this success, and I'm not happy. So I think those are all the lessons, especially for right now in our world, that we can take from St. Francis.
Okay, live simply. Friendship is huge, real friendship, not online. Silence and focus on the Eucharist. That's beautiful. Thanks, Teresa. Okay, so you highlight the Franciscan spirit and how it continues beyond St. Francis's lifetime. How do you see that spirit alive today in people like Mother Angelica and her legacy that she's left behind? And I didn't even realize this connection until I read it in your book.
Well, what's interesting about that, if you go to the shrine in Hansville, Alabama, the first time I went there years ago, probably, 10, 15 years ago, I've been working for EWTN for over 20 years, and the first time I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, this looks like Assisi. The way she designed it, it's really a mini Assisi, and that was the intent. But I think if you think about Mother Angelica, where she was very vibrant, obviously she was Italian, so she was very outspoken. Francis had just a zeal for the Lord, so did Mother Angelica. And so the whole spirit of vibrancy, of zeal for the Lord, of not being afraid, and Francis did all kinds of, at that time, people thought, the man was out of his mind. I mean, people thought Mother Angelica, what was she thinking when she was going to, start a Catholic network in the Bible Belt, right? And also, when she started the radio network, she actually started it in an area that the engineers told her wouldn't work, but it did, right? So I think there's a lot to think about in terms of the spirituality of St. Francis and the spirituality of Mother Angelica, in terms of the fire that she had in her gut, in her heart for the Lord, the feistiness, the fact that she was a great preacher. I mean, she was on the air every single day, right, talking to people. And so there's a lot of similarities. But she also sought silence and prayer, and she loved to pray the Rosary, and she loved our Blessed Mother. So there's a lot of similarities that are carried through between Mother Angelica, the Poor Clares, and of course the Franciscans at EWTN.
And you talked a lot about Eucharistic adoration and how was that? Yeah. How that was
thank you.
a good huge connection too, and how important it is for us today.
That's so important. And of course, they have the Eucharistic adoration, and any time at EWTN at the studios, you walk by the chapel, and of course, there's a big monstrance. And it reminds me again so much of Italy. And adoration is such a big part of the worship and the prayer life of anyone who's going to go to Hansville is going to get the sense of the importance of Eucharistic adoration.
Okay, so it's such a beautiful thing that you do in these books, Teresa, where you blend travel and spirituality. I love I'm looking at it right now, Tease Italy, Tease Insider Travel Tips. I mean, it runs the gamut, and they're really easy to read, little segments that you can kind of take with you as you're traveling on foot or driving in car in Italy. How can someone who's never had the ability to go to Italy or might not even get there, quote unquote, walk in the footsteps of St. Francis through your book? What would you say?
Well, I mean, not to give a shameless plug, but the reason I wrote the book is that's what we're talking, right? I mean, I want people to experience Italy even if they can't get there physically. And so I take people, on a journey through Italy. The first book is huge. It's close to 400 pages. This one is going to be, I think, when it's all said and done, it's at the printers right now, 260 pages, so not quite as long, but still long. But some of the pictures are mine. Some of the pictures are, from the actual churches. And so the images, the idea, and also telling people to slow down. If you remember where I talked about my friend who's a guide, Daniela, who's a guide in Assisi, how she's always telling people to slow down and not to miss anything. If you are going to go to Italy, and if you're reading the book, the same thing applies. Do it slowly. Savor it. Look at the pictures. Look at what, the captions say. See what I'm saying about the area and the land. And you have your own, Lectio Divina, your own Visio Divina. And the other thing they can do, too, which is really helpful and goes along with the book, and we're going to be promoting the book along with the series I mentioned earlier, I have my second Saints in Italy series coming out. The first one was entitled Saints of Italy, from Lazio and Umbria. This one is called The Unknown St. Francis, very similar to the book, and it's done by the Mission Advancement Team at EWTN. It's called the EWTN Learn Series, and if people want to know about it, it's just EWTN.com, St. Francis. It'll take you to the page. You can sign up. It's free, and you can download 8 episodes on the life of St. Francis. You can also watch the one that came out last year. So there's going to be 8 episodes on St. Francis. We're going to take you to, today we're going to take you to Assisi. We're going to take you to Spoleto. We're going to take you to Greccio. We're going to take you to Rivetorto. We're taking you to St. Mary of the Angels. So everything that's mentioned in the book, you'll see it visually because we literally go there and walk through there and talk to people. It's so beautifully filmed. The guys did a great job with it. So read the book, take your time reading the book, and then watch the series because we'll take you right there.
I'm stuck on these beautiful photographs that you have in the book and just really reflecting on that. It's so great. All right. So
thank you.
Oh, you do such a great job. And of course, your zeal for this and for the faith is very captivating and it's catchy. So I appreciate that. Okay, so for listeners who are inspired by our conversation, Teresa, where can they purchase Italy's Shrines and Wonders Volume 2 on St. Francis?
It's already available for pre-order at the EWTN Religious Catalog, at Barnes & Noble, and I think also any place where you buy your books, it's there. It's up already. It's been up for a while. It comes out, it's going to hit the bookstores. The hard copy will hit the bookstores at the end of May, early June, but you can pre-order it. And so I would recommend people do that. And they can also order it from my website, teresatomeo.com. So very simple. And if you want to again, check out the series, which is free. It's EWTN.com/St. Francis. And then I've got 2 pilgrimages going to Italy in the fall. If people want to join us, that's on the website as well, teresatomeo.com.
Oh, my gosh. I can dream. All right. So what's next for you? I'm curious. Future volumes, new journeys?
We're praying about volume 3, and I'm thinking, I haven't decided this yet, and I haven't talked to the publisher yet because they'll probably freak because these books are a lot of work. And they're like, when we were talking about doing this one, it was so funny, Ellen. They're like, oh my gosh, because there's so many pictures and, there's little captions, and it's a very graphic, very, photographic book. So it's not. Other books I've written, they take time. You have to send it to the printer and whatnot, but you have to be very careful with the layout and the pages and all of that. And so we'll probably do, God willing, another Italy Shrines and Wonders. And I'm thinking, because I get so many requests for this from my ministry, Tease Italy, where I coach people on Italy travel, the Amalfi Coast.
Yes.
Sorrento and Amalfi Coast, yeah.
Or Cinque Terre. I've been there, and that's quite an incredible spot, too. Though I've heard you say that's kind of gotten overpopulated with tourists.
That's the challenge, though. So that's what I'm really praying about, because I don't want people not to go, because those 2 areas, that area of Liguria Coast, the Cinque Terre, and then the Amalfi Coast and all those towns, are both still breathtakingly gorgeous. But I want to be honest with people that if they're going, there are ways to avoid the crowds, and that's what I have to do. I have to highlight the positive and just show them and tell them, okay, this is what, don't go in July or August. Go in low season. Don't stay in the touristy places. Stay outside. And there are plenty of places on the Amalfi Coast and Cinque Terre you can stay where you're not right in it and you can still enjoy it. So, but it's so beautiful, and there's so many saints, even on the Mediterranean coast. Of course, now we have St. Bartolo Longo in Pompeii, which is north of the Amalfi Coast, and then you have St. Andrew buried in Amalfi. You have San Gennaro and the liquefying blood. I mean, there's just so much going on there, and it's probably one of the most popular places in all of Italy still. So,
well, if you need somebody to stand in for you and do research on the ground in Italy, let me know. I'll be there in a second.
Okay.
All right. So one final question, Teresa. After writing this book, Italy's Shrines and Wonders, Volume 2, and immersing yourself in the life of St. Francis of Assisi, if there's one thing you hope every listener takes from his life, what would it be?
A love of Jesus and the Eucharist, bottom line.
Yes.
And seeing God in everything. And really, I think just love of Jesus, because Francis, everything was about Christ. Everything was about the Eucharist. At the end of the day, he loved animals. He did tame the wolf in Gubbio. Some people say it was a legend, but I really get into that in the book and also in the series. But everything he did was to show people how much God loved them. And
direct them towards him, not ourselves.
Well, everything points back to Jesus. Yep.
That's right. Oh, gosh. Teresa, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing the beauty of Italy's Shrines and Wonders, Volume 2.
Thank you for having me. I can't believe our time is up. That went by so fast.
It did. See what happens when we talk about things we love?
I know. Like Italy is addicting. So
This is awesome. Well, please keep Divine Mercy Radio in your prayers, and we'll be certainly praying for you and the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm glad you liked the book.
Okay. If you missed any part of this episode or want to catch up on past conversations filled with inspiration and hope, you can find them all at divinemercyradio.org. Just click on local shows. And don't forget, you can take FaithWorks with you wherever you go. Just download the free Divine Mercy Radio app from your app store. Simply search Divine Mercy Radio NC, and you're all set to listen anytime, anywhere. St. Francis of Assisi, pray for us. God bless.